What's up, sexy people? It is Dave. It is Duncan, back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new release from Denver, Colorado, stoner sludge quartet, Abrams. The band's new album, Blue City, will be released on May 24th via Blues Funeral Recordings.
It's a great name for a record label.
It is. I think we've said that before.
Mm-hmm.
Formed in 2013, this thunderous trio have always made a point. Thunderous trio? I think I called them a quartet earlier. Either the press release is wrong or I am wrong.
I thought there was 4 of them. So
no, I've got 4. I've got 4 members here. Press release, come on. Blues Funeral Recordings, come on.
Unless they know something we don't know. He's not in the band anymore.
So this thunderous quartet, I've always made a point of honour at crafting compelling melodies driven by blistering energy, from the full-blown progressive sludge and post-hardcore aggression of their debut album, Lust, Love, Loss, 2015, and follow-up Morning in 2017. The band has honed their craft and revealed their magnetism with 2020's modern ways, yet it is the moody and mountain-heavy rock venture of their 4th full-length, In the Dark, 2022, that saw the now foursome taking
right. We're going to take that back.
Take it back. All is good. Now taking their music journey to the next level. Should have read ahead.
That PR guy was flung under the bus so fucking hard and then given mouth to mouth within a minute. Come back to us.
With tongues. In the Dark showcased an expansive collection of AMREP-worthy post-grunge tunes that trigger a wide range of emotions through luscious guitar hooks, brooding leads and outstanding vocals. The album landed in numerous end-of-year lists and was unanimously acclaimed by international critics. FYI.
That's fucking us. Can we call ourselves international? Well, if we were in America, could we then look at ourselves being in Scotland? You can't call ourselves international critics whilst being in Scotland talking about ourselves. But I think we qualify to be international critics.
Quartet, international, not international.
Hey, listen.
What?
We review from the heart. We don't review facts. We review feelings here, Dave.
A spearhead of the Denver rock scene, the foursome has recently joined the ranks of tastemaker label Blues Funeral Records, great label by the way, for a spring 2024 release of their 5th album, Blue City.
We'll get through this, honestly.
Recorded and produced by Kurt fucking Ballou.
That's how you know you've made it.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, I mean, when you go to the goat, that's how you know you've made it. Yeah. Like, ow.
It is a legendary God City studio. Their new album, Blue City, is why genre-defying heaviness and perfect melodic songcraft converge, a sojourn through lush cinematic passages and contemplative psychedelia. Zach Amster comments, the songs on Blue City deal with the feeling of being trapped in a place of comfort and normality, where we may really want to pack up and try anything new, but the scare of change is holding us back for what is known as routine. The Blue City is a metaphor for this as a cold but familiar place that keeps us imprisoned from a drastically new experience. A comfort in the familiar, a fear of the unknown. So, we have been hype men for this band since 2020.
Oh yeah, like Modern Ways for me was an album. I still play it to death.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of love these guys. So I'm just putting it out there, bit of a mark for this band. Right. So come at me, internet.
Yeah, we reviewed their last album, In the Dark, back in 2022. But we were both very curious as to what would come next from Abrams, because we said on the last review they somehow managed to improve on a sound that doesn't really need improved.
Yeah, like they could have just kept releasing albums like Modern Ways, and that, you know, it would have been fine. That's a sound that is timeless, and then you came out and made it better, and I was like, I don't know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to just kind of keep the perfect sound and not fuck with it too much. But now this is better, so like we'll just keep it like this, guys. And then they were like, "Oh, watch, hey, Kurt Ballou."
Oh, hey.
the fifth member of the band, the quintet.
Quintet.
Abrams, the quintet.
The last album saw them kind of get a bit more adventurous with the atmosphere and stuff, but where would Blue City sit within the Abrams sound? Duncan, what did you think of Blue City?
I can't stress this enough, right? Like, we talk about, I know some reviewers get very geeky about bands, very geeky about maybe guitars, very geeky about drum pedals, looking at you. And then there's other podcasts out there that get a little geeky about the people behind the desk. And I think that's us. I think we fall into that category of kind of being like fangirling out of like certain combinations or of a name. It's not a coincidence that a lot of the same names behind mixing and mastering appear in our videos, right? That's because there's almost a guaranteed level of interest or quality on what they themselves seem to attach themselves to. They're not just in it to make money. I'm sure they need the money, but they seem to really be passionate about the projects they work with and the artists that they work with as well. So if you were ever going to take Abrams and elevate their already huge sound, Kurt Ballew's the guy to do it. The guy that literally seems to be able to amplify everything without losing anything from a band's sound. And Blue City is the prime example for that. Like, from the opening seconds of the opening track Tomorrow, you are instantly going to be thinking, this sounds fucking massive. It just sounds huge, like effortlessly huge. And the other thing that I would say about that as well is, I think Abrams have weirdly, where a lot of bands try and fuck with the formula too much, I think actually what they've done maybe better than any band I can think of in recent memory is actually distill and refine down to what exactly is the best element they do, and then just give you that track on track. This is an album that like meanders in the best possible way with like huge swaths of whimsy in the vocals. The vocals just flow in a really interesting way, and they're not concentrated on giving you the hookiest chorus, where they were doing that on Modern Ways. It was like, it's a fucking huge chorus, listen to it. It's kind of like they've almost went past the chorus. Like, they're like, the chorus is an outdated concept. So instead what we're going to do is give you these massive sprawling vocal lines that just sit so high above everything else you hear, and we're not going to give you these earworm hooks that are going to have you coming back to them. So that's not to take away, like tracks like Firewalks, for example, have choruses that are instantly memorable and you can sing back on, but they're not writing for the chorus. I kind of love that about this. The second thing to mention is the guitar work has always been really interesting. On this one, it's just fucking great. I love like the guitar tone, which has that oomph behind it, but also has huge amounts of reverb. Like you lost trying to find where you are listening to the guitar sound. It's just as I've used this word already tonight, but it's very hypnotic. It's got a very swoony hypnotic thing with a bit of bite underneath it. I also think on this album particularly, they've kind of mastered it, and they had it on other albums, but the kind of little playful like tail ends on riffs, which are like big kind of like ringing out notes, and you get a diddle, and you're like, oh hi, like that. And they also, like, weirdly out of nowhere on one or two songs here, hit out a little southern groove that was never part of their sound before. But it works, man, when you're listening to tracks like Crack Ant, for example, or Death On. There are these little moments where you get just these little hooks that sound really, really, really cool. On my first listen, I was concerned about one thing, and actually on subsequent listens, I have kind of backed off on it. My big concern on the first listen was that in terms of a BPM, this album doesn't really move away from the kind of central speed all the way through it. Whereas the previous albums will have one or two tracks where they'll give you a little bit something, a little bit sharper, a little bit faster. If anything, tracks get slower and then come back to that speed. And I actually think it totally fits their sound. Knowing their sludge pedigree and background as well, their influences from that makes a lot of sense to me. It's just not the Abrams sound I'm used to. And by about the third listen, I actually found that I was no longer considering it what I would see as an issue. I actually thought the songs benefited from those long ringing out moments, those huge soaring vocals, and it wasn't an issue, but it was at first, so I will mention that. The last thing I'll say about this one is that, in particular, this album clocks in about 44 minutes in length. It's 10 songs. Every single song is in or around single length. But yet they still manage to make all the tracks really interesting. You're going to get your guitar solos. You're going to get your sections where things break down and go to a different place. You're going to get moments where tracks build up a bit slower than others. You're going to get tracks where things crawl down at the end. It feels most like the band have fully developed the sound that I think was always in them, and now they're kind of showing it in their most confident way. A band that sounds hugely commercial, but are not like predisposed to giving you hooks on every track. A band that were always heavy, but have managed to make themselves more melodic and still retain that heaviness. And a band that are just really comfortable in their own skin now. If it's taken them the 11 years of their career to get to the point where they're working with Kurt Ballou, I would say that journey's been well. The issue that I always felt sorry for Abrams on was that when Modern Ways was released, COVID hit about the same time, so they never really got to do anything with that. And then on the previous album, it was kind of just coming out of the COVID stuff, and it kind of felt like that it was almost like they were snake bit. They couldn't get that. They couldn't get that happy balance. It's great to see them like on the label that they're on now, getting the push that they're getting now, working with the talent that they're working now. And I know they've been teasing a lot on social media about international tours, and I hope Scotland's one of those destinations. Love to see these guys live. The last thing, I know I already said this is the last thing, but this is the last thing. I don't know how much the band are involved with this, but the branding on this album is fucking great. So the artwork for the album is great. I love it. But the singles that they've released thus far have a particular template in the branding of it that remind me of kind of old vinyl. It's old vinyl slips. And I love that. I think I'm someone that likes both the package and the music, and when bands get that's the same reason I love the way that a band like Blood Command commit to, right, it's bonkers zany, over the top, huge colours, but there's a theme throughout the artwork for all the singles and the album. I think Abrams have kind of weirdly tapped into a vibe and a sound that actually matches the artwork effortlessly, and the cover art of this is blues, and it's blues and hues, and this album is blues and hues. I think this is great. I think they are such an underrated band. I really, really, really do. I think Abrams fly under the radar so much, and I'm kind of hoping this is the album that kind of is kind of coming out party for the band of, look, we've been here for a long time doing this. It's about time you stood up and took notice. So I thought this was great.
Nice.
What about you, Dave? You're a big a Ballou-ophile. I don't know what they call someone else. like as obsessed as I am with Kurt Ballou's production, you take it to another level.
Let me just start there, Duncan. Let's just start there. Mr. Ballou. Ballou. Take a fucking bow. Take a bow, son, because this production is a goddamn sexual tyrannosaurus, Duncan.
And it's not as if they weren't working with talent before. The previous album was produced by the guy that does... it was
Dave Otero that did the last
Dave
one.
Otero. It's not as if they're like, we've never worked with, now we've got a real producer. It's like, they sounded fucking huge already, right?
Yeah, they did. But the punch on this album is ridiculous. Like, the drums in particular are killer on this. Like, a real, kind of gutsy kind of snap to them that just really accentuates every groove on the album. The guitars as well, so kind of full and thick sounding. I mean, it's difficult not to get excited when things get heavy on this release. And vocally, it does sound huge. Like the layering is actually quite subtle, but it's it's not in your face, but it adds a lot of depth to the vocals on the album. And the balance of this mix is just absolutely perfect. There's not a single thing out of place on this. I actually quite like the way that the drums are slightly pushed in the mix, just to give it that extra kind of kick. So production wise, like this is stellar, like absolutely fantastic job from Kurt Ballou. In terms of the album itself, Blue City was a different listening experience to In the Dark for me. In the Dark had like some of the biggest earworms Abrams have ever written, and that was an album that instantly hit me. Like I was sucked into it straight away, and you were singing along the choruses before the song had even finished, and I rinsed that album to death. Like it had so many hooks, and although the production on Blue City like grabbed me very quickly, musically and vocally it didn't hit me as immediately as In the Dark did. As you said, there are hooks on this album for sure, but they aren't laid out quite as obviously as they were on In the Dark. Like the first track on In the Dark was Like Hell, and that was like a song that was within 30 seconds, the hook was in, like straight away. Whereas the opener on this release, Tomorrow, it's much more guitar driven. The riffs are a bit more elaborate. There's layers of guitars, there's clean picked stuff going on, there's lead work, all various tones and textures. To be honest, it almost pulled my attention away from the vocals on the first track, and it wasn't till like the track was going on in the last kind of minute or so I was like, all right, okay, wait a minute, the vocals were starting to kind of catch my ear. But and as I said, there is a hook there, but it's almost more reserved on this album. And as the album goes on, sure, they expand more on the choruses. There's lots of layers, lots of harmonies vocally, but as a whole, it isn't as earwormy as they have been in the past. When I went back and listened to In the Dark, on like tracks like Fever Dreams from the last album, they had like various kind of vocal textures and tones. It was like kind of more kind of like shouty kind of vocals, like in a different register from the main vocal. And it added some kind of nice alternatives to the album vocally, but there's a bit more kind of distinction, but they don't really do that as much on Blue City. There's a little bit on Death Ohm, which was probably one of my favourite tracks because it did feel a little bit kind of more kind of variety, a bit more varied vocally, a bit more individual. Musically, as you said, it is much busier. The guitars have taken a more noticeable kind of role in the Abrams sound, where they have become slightly less bar chord driven and more kind of note based. It is quite reminiscent of Cave-In at times, and it's something, a style that they did kind of use on previous releases as well. This isn't new, but it's definitely more pronounced on this release. They've leaned into it a bit heavier, and it does make things more interesting musically. Tracks like Firewalks or Crack Ant feel more elaborate in the guitars, even the way they can inject the lead work in just to fill a space. Sometimes for me, I felt like it was slightly overworked, if I'm honest. Like it felt like the guitars always had to be playing something where it maybe wasn't always needed. And as the album went on, I felt like there were certain motifs or ideas where they started to feel a little bit similar in places. But that aside, as the band have kind of alluded to, this does feel quite familiar as well. Like there's a definite sound that they have that continues on throughout the albums. This is more refined, but vocally, especially on this album, there's a bit more of an emotive side to the vocals on this one. Tracks like Narc had this quite melancholic kind of element to them, that made the vocals feel a bit more profound at times. What I would also say really stood out in this release was how tight the band actually sound on Blue City.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the kind of more intricate guitar work they're using actually benefits the album. All those little patterns that the guitars and the drums are kind of syncing up on does make this sound even more locked in than the previous release. Interestingly, up until In the Dark, their last album, every full length they'd release was 10 tracks long. And they all clocked in about 40 to 42 minutes. Then on In the Dark, they went slightly longer. They went 11 tracks. It was just over 47 minutes. On Blue City, they've went back to the original formula, 10 tracks, and it sits about 42 minutes. So they're obviously conscious of this when putting an album together. And I think like trying to find that sweet spot in the length, so it never, kind of outstays its welcome is a thing that they've obviously just trying to refine, and I think they've got it spot on. I think the runtime for this album is perfect. Like I think the 10 tracks, 42 minutes, it works. It never feels too long or like it's went on like longer than it should have. Overall on this one, I think there's a lot of things that Abrams have tightened up on this release, definitely elaborated on. But there is also like a comfort level to it that just sounds like Abrams. Production is killer, but to be honest, there was never really going to be any doubt there, to be honest. But as an album, I enjoyed hearing this new release from Abrams, but it didn't actually lure me back quite as much as In the Dark did, if I'm honest. So, scoring wise, what are you thinking for Blue City?
So I'm coming in at a 4.5 on this one. Right. And that's not because I think the album is less than the previous album, which Dave has... was the reason I asked you before we started recording. The previous album I gave a 5 to. I don't think it's... I think we're in a transitional phase for a band. Not starting anew. But I kind of feel like this is the next chapter of the band. And I feel that they've made a conscious decision to move away from big, massive, catchy hooks. And I would like to see that journey continue. I also think there's a space in there to make some of the vocals more memorable. They do soar and they are hauntingly beautiful to listen to. And at times, like just like a weird, you just like keep saying that you can slide into them. It's just that the tone and texture and the layering of them is just kind of phenomenal. But where he stretched his vocals on the previous album a little bit more, he's not doing that as much. And I'm not saying stretch to like force yourself to be hitting notes that you probably shouldn't do. I just kind of feel like everything sits within a very similar register. And it's not as remarkable as what it did before. Musically, the album shit hot, and production's killer. So it's a little bit less than what I gave their previous album, but I stand by my statement. I think Abrams are they're just one of those bands that people just seem to constantly sleep on, and like give them their due, like please, and get them to Scotland as well. So 4.5 from me.
4.5. I scored In the Dark a 4.5, the previous album, and I think this does move toward a more mature kind of Abrams sound. Wasn't quite as memorable for me as In the Dark, so I'm going to go 4 out of 5 on this one.
There we go.
So that is Blue City by Abrams, out on May 24th. On Blues Funeral Recordings. Links below to the band, to the pre-order. Check it out, have a little listen, see what you think. Definitely check this one out. As Duncan says, not a lot of people talk about Abrams or don't talk about them enough. So if you like any of the kind of sounds that we've mentioned, any of the bands we've mentioned, check these guys out. Blue City.
When a PR company's talking about how much international attention they're getting, I think that's because they're not getting enough US attention. So add it to your list.
So that is the review. Thank you for checking it out, much appreciated. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye everyone.